Hey, everybody. Good day. Good day to my beautiful people out there. Today is Thursday, May the 7th, and we are continuing with our discussion of film throughout the decades and talking about the 1960s, which is a really turbulent decade for this country. And again, with the whole art imitating life deal, you're going to definitely see a lot of the craziness that's going on in our country and around the world reflected in the films of this time. So, first things first, and this is not really obviously a reflection of turbulent times. We get a ton of family movies. So if you're a fan of the Disney movie, especially the Disney musicals like Mary Poppins and things like that, Bedknobs and Broomsticks and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and all those, you get a ton of those. You get The Sound of Music and other family oriented films. Um, and so that's, I guess, a terrible way to begin a slide about the turbulent 60s, but there you go. We also get a bunch of foreign films. So Hollywood, we tend to think of America as being like the genesis, the epicenter of film. I guess to some extent it still is, but every developed country in the world has a film industry. It's not just Hollywood. In fact, we are, last time I checked, number four in terms of global output. Anybody know who number one is? Number one, people usually get. Number one is India. Bollywood is the Indian equivalent of Hollywood. Number two, you would never get, even if I gave you a million guesses. The number two country in terms of global output is Nigeria. Their equivalent of Hollywood is Nollywood, and almost every one of their videos movies goes straight to video, straight to DVD. Actually, the U.S. is number three. Then it's like Japan, and then France and China. Everybody's got a film industry. Well, um, in the United States, even today, we don't show foreign films. At least we don't in major, in movie theaters. If you want to see a foreign film, you got to go to an art house theater in a major city, or you got to look for it on one of the streaming sites. But the American films, especially the American blockbuster films, the big movies, the Avengers and Star Wars of the world, those can be seen in pretty much any movie or any movie theater in the world. All over the world, you can see American films. You can't see foreign films in America. Well, in the '60s, we start to see more foreign films catching on here, in particular westerns, which is weird. But there was a series of films in the '60s called spaghetti westerns, and they were called spaghetti westerns because they were directed by Italian film directors. And if you know who Clint Eastwood is, and you should, this is some of his biggest early movies were made as part of these spaghetti western series. So like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Fistful of Dollars, and For a Few Dollars More are all spaghetti westerns. We get a lot of movies that discuss nuclear fears of the Cold War. So, if you've ever seen Doctor Strangelove, that's a movie, it's a comedy about um, the idea of mutually assured destruction and the absurdity of the fact that the Soviet Union. Oh my gosh, my dog. Hold on. That dog and I are going to come to blows. I will fight him 30s boxer style if I have to, and I will win. Anyway, we get a bunch of movies that talk up the ridiculousness of mad mutually assured destruction, the idea that we have all these nukes so we don't have to use all these nukes, and it's nuts. We get a bunch of movies that reflect the social revolutions that are going on. So we have movies that deal with issues of race. We have movies that deal with issues of sexuality and women's rights. Just like the 1960s were dealing with those things, so will the films of the '60s. So you get to see movies with more female lead roles or women playing a stronger role, and kind of breaking some of the stereotypes in the mold that Hollywood had set for women. And then we get the new rating system, the MPAA rating system, which is still in use today. At the beginning of this, we had G, which is for general audiences, and that would be like The Sound of Music, and Mary Poppins would be G-rated films. And we had PG, which is parental guidance suggested, and then we had R, which is restricted, and then X-rated films, which are, you know what they are, or maybe you don't. Maybe that's good that you don't. But we don't get PG-13 until the '80s. The first PG-13 rated film ever. Here's some good trivia. It was the original Red Dawn with Patrick Swayze and the Emilio Estevez and Charlie Sheen. And the very first NC-17 movie ever was a movie called Showgirls, which was terrible. Came out in the '90s. You don't see NC-17 anymore. Like, nobody wants that tagged to their film. And also, the way that the ratings are utilized has changed over the years. For example, you take a movie like The Godfather, which in 1973 or 74 received an R rating. If you watch that movie, if that movie came out today, it would be PG-13 at best. There are no F words. There's one brief nudity scene, and the violence is certainly graphic, but not like crazy over the top like you see, in some movies today. So an R rating like what The Godfather received in 1973 pales in comparison to the R rating that like Wolf of Wall Street got a couple years ago. Like, it's not even close. So yeah, there you go. Some actors and actresses of the '60s. My favorite actor of all time probably is Paul Newman. If you don't know who Paul Newman is, just a good guy in real life, and usually on screen played a good guy. Paul Newman's an interesting character, and of course he's passed away. But he drove race cars. He was married to the same woman for 50 years, which is a rarity in Hollywood. If you've ever had Newman's own popcorn or salad dressing, he created that brand, and every penny of it goes to help poor children. So he's just a good guy. He's in some of my favorite movies of all time. Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid is a great movie. Cool Hand Luke is one of my all-time favorite movies. He's just a good actor. We got Sandy Duncan, who's been in a bunch of musicals, and you may recognize her from The Princess Diaries. John Wayne, who always played the same character in every movie he was in, played John Wayne. Didn't matter what the movie was about, he always brought the same character to it. Jack Lemmon, who's a very funny actor. Sidney Poitier, who was the first African-American male to win an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Sophia Loren, who was an Italian actress. Gregory Peck. If you've ever seen To Kill a Mockingbird, he played Atticus Finch. He won an Oscar for that. And I'm blanking on who this is. Why can't I think of who that is? Shirley MacLaine. That's who that is. Shirley MacLaine, who's still alive today, I believe. So those are just some of the actors and actresses of the 1960s. All right, the '70s. So this would be the second era of film where people point to it as being, the greatest of all time. They call it neoclassic or new or post-classical Hollywood, and mostly because of the directors. So if you look at a lot of the major directors of this set of the 1970s, they are held today as like the greatest directors of all time. If there was a Mount Rushmore of directors in Hollywood, these people would all be on it. You're going to get explicit sexual content and violence and the F-bomb. So, the good stuff. So this is when movies became over the top, violent, and sexually charged with movies like Clockwork Orange or Taxi Driver. You get movies that are going to mess around with audience expectations. So again, I'm going to reference Taxi Driver. If you've never seen it, it's a Martin Scorsese film with Robert De Niro and Jodie Foster, and it's about a guy named Travis Bickle who comes back from Vietnam, and he's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and he becomes a vigilante, and he's our good guy. And we don't normally like mentally unstable killers as our good guys, but he is. Or The Godfather, the protagonist, the good guys in The Godfather are ruthless mobsters. So it messes with our expectations. Or Jaws. Obviously, the hero of Jaws was the shark. So, it's like that. We get new filmmakers. So again, I mentioned Martin Scorsese, who's one of the greatest directors of all time. Francis Ford Coppola, Stanley Kubrick, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Mel Brooks. These are all famous directors that are still working today in Hollywood and making great movies. Most of them are. Some of them are retired. And then we get the first blockbuster films ever. So The Godfather is really one of the very first blockbuster films. And by blockbuster, I mean a movie that is going to sell millions and millions and millions of tickets and be in theaters for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and have product tie-ins and action figures and sequels. That's not how movies usually were before then. They would have a trailer for it or some posters or billboards, and that would be about it. And now we're going to see movies marketed, not just in the United States, but overseas as well. And you're going to see, corporate product tie-ins with like cups from McDonald's for Star Wars or ET or whatever. And ET was in the 80s, but you get my point. So these are the first blockbusters. And I told you the story about George Lucas and how he lobbied to get the sequel rights and the merchandising rights for Star Wars and how that was a brand new thing. Well, that's how all movies are now. You see when there's a blockbuster, huge movie come out, you see the media blitz that comes with it and all the product tie-ins and video games and other stuff. So that's the norm. Well, it wasn't like that before the 70s. All right, some actors and actresses of the 70s. Oh, I guess I don't have any actors and actresses of the 70s. Well, we got Harrison Ford and Robert De Niro and Al Pacino and Clint Eastwood and Dustin Hoffman and people like that. There's a bunch. So, all right, that's it for today. And I will catch up with you guys next week where we'll hit the 1980s, 90s, and into the 2000s. And then we're going to start talking about movie genres and types of movies and have some fun with that. So that's it for today. I will see you guys next week. Peace and love as always.